Hello, what's going on, everybody? Zack Rosenblatt here, NJ.com, live at NovaCare Complex. It's Wednesday. The Eagles practice today in preparation for Sunday's rematch with the Minnesota Vikings, rematch of the NFC Championship Game, where the Eagles just roundhoused the Minnesota Vikings. I'm sure there'll be some trolling. Eagles fans have been trolling the Vikings since they killed them that game. There'll probably be some Foles skull chants. I mean, how excited are you for this game? This has kind of been circled on the calendar since the schedule came out, really.
Well, I think it'll either be an affirmation of the rebound that the Eagles intend to have this season, or it'll be an absolute start of a tailspin, because the Vikings are a good team. Their record is kind of awful. They are 1-2-1. And really, they need to win this game. Both teams really need to win this game. Obviously, the NFC East is very convoluted just because the Redskins haven't played a fourth game and they have 2 wins. The Cowboys are 2-2 just like the Eagles, but they've actually played a division game and had a division win of those two wins. And then, the Giants, it's still early enough that maybe they can come to life.
They won't.
They probably won't, but, this is a game that the Eagles need to win basically based on the fact that they're home, and that's what they do. They win at home. They have not won on the road. They also need to win convincingly. I don't know if anybody's going to feel a lot better if they win another 19-17 style game.
Where it comes down to a fourth down stop in the last second again.
Right. There needs to be a big trick play. There needs to be just overall efficiency. Carson Wentz has yet to play the Vikings he didn't play the Vikings in the playoffs. He's a guy that I think needs to make a statement here. He grew up in Viking fan territory in North Dakota. He's going to probably...
You just kind of said that with an accent back.
Yeah, I know. I don't know where that came from. North Dakota. But, this is an opportunity for him to really this is the game of the week for Fox. This is the opportunity for him to say, look, I'm back. Rip off the jersey and show the Superman emblem on his chest.
You want Carson Wentz to just rip off his jersey? God.
I mean, if he's going to make a statement, you might as well, right? It's his equivalent of the flea flicker. The Eagles are getting healthier. Alshon Jeffrey's back. I tweeted out video. He made this a lot of people are talking about the 31-yard catch. A lot of people are talking about the 16-yard catch. But he had a 13-yard catch before that touchdown.
Against the Titans, you're talking about.
Yeah, against the Titans. And we'll get more into the overall matchups and everything later. But Malcolm Butler tried to manhandle him and press him and just out physical him, and it didn't work. Jeffrey some people have said that Jeffrey doesn't really alter the offense. That's completely factually inaccurate. What he does is he allows Carson Wentz to target a well-covered player. He wasn't able to do that before. Zach Ertz is really good when he's open. He's a guy that when he's contested isn't necessarily going to make consistent catches. Alshon Jeffrey does.
Absolutely. We'll talk about Alshon a little bit more momentarily. We're going to get into our 8 storylines. We're going to do this every week. We weren't able to last week because our podcast got deleted because we messed up, and there were some technical difficulties involving breathing and some other things. But yeah, we're running title Eagle 8. It's pretty lame, but we'll come up with something better at some point. We'll get right into it. First one, Darren Sproles, Corey Clement, both missed Week 4 against the Titans. Darren Sproles hasn't played since Week 1. Both of them were limited. Both of them are day-to-day currently, and we're still not really sure what their status is for Sunday. I mean, it's not a good sign that they weren't out there for practice on Wednesday.
Right. Darren Sproles suffered his hamstring injury during practice in Week 2, and then Corey Clement suffered a quad injury
the next week, I think.
During
was
week 2.
2?
Yeah, because then he was questionable
on
week
Friday,
3, and then
yeah.
So he, they've both been a little banged up. Obviously, Wendell Smallwood has picked up his production. Josh Adams has flashed. Jay Ajayi's back in the mix. I thought he had a pretty decent game against the Titans. That said, though, it would be a huge, huge boost to have Darren Sproles back in this lineup because of what he can do. He's one of the elite punt returners of all time. DeAndre Carter had that 42-yard return, but nothing makes up for what the intangibles and the talent that Sproles has. He's just a proven entity. Also, right now the Eagles hold 6 wide receivers and 5 running backs, but they have 3 safeties. Getting Sproles back in the lineup may allow them to alter those numbers a little bit and move things around. Clement obviously is another guy that has made this offense work at times, and he needs to be able to be in this lineup as well. He's also really good on special teams.
Yeah, and an underrated part about Sproles, even though he's 5'6", he might be, if not their best, one of their best at picking up blitzes.
Oh, absolutely.
And blocking. And I mean, we're going to talk about the offensive line momentarily, but I mean, Carson Wentz has been on the ground too much. He's been rushed too much, and it helps to have a running back who's savvy, a veteran, and is probably a little bit better at picking up, the things that defenses throw at them better than a Wendell Smallwood or Jai. He's not a great blocker. I mean, Corey Clement, he's probably pretty decent, but he's also banged up. So if they can get one or both of them back, then you'll see the running back group all together for the first time this season, actually, because week 1, were they all playing in week 1, actually?
They did play in week 1.
Yeah, that was the only time.
Yeah.
But then Ajayi didn't play basically until the second half because he was banged up.
Right.
So it was kind of like they weren't all together, and then since then it's been like a shuffling of who's healthy and who's not. Ajayi still has a hurt back. That's going to bother him all season.
Right.
So just getting as many of those, because they're good when they have a good committee going where multiple guys can do different things, and it's been pretty limited to Smallwood and Ajayi the last 2 weeks. Another topic that Doug Peterson talked about, it's kind of been looming in the background because you and I have talked quite a bit about our concern about the defensive tackle depth and how maybe Fletcher Cox is playing too much and all that jazz. And the reason why it's like that is because Tim Jernigan went and hurt his back in some non-football injury that they haven't really disclosed to us. He had back surgery. I've kind of doubted the whole time that he would play this season. Doug Peterson kind of was non-committal about him playing this season. He'll technically be eligible to come back off the non-football injury list in Week 7. They would have to release somebody, but I'm not entirely convinced that he plays this season at this. And even if he does, I don't know what you're going to get from a guy who hasn't been not literally on the practice field since the Super Bowl. I just don't see a scenario where he was inconsistent last year anyway. I just don't see a scenario where he helps them, and I'm concerned about that group. I mean, you've touched on it in multiple stories on our website. Destiny Vallejo is not going to cut it. Haloti Ngata has shown some stuff, but in 20 to 25 snaps, which is his highest he can play at 34 and well past his prime, and they signed him to be the number 3 guy, like a Bo Allen type, whereas if they had Bo Allen, I think he would be fine starting right now. So, I mean, they got to trade for somebody, or there's nobody on the free agent market.
Yeah, this is a very slim free agent market for defensive linemen.
And at this point in the year in general, if he's a free agent, unless it's Des Bryant, there's a reason why he's a free agent.
Well, there's a reason why
Des Bryant is better than the usual guy who's available this time of the year.
Sure. I think they're going to have to get creative. They brought up Trevon Hester from the practice squad to swap out with Bruce Hector, who I actually thought they really, really like.
The Mike K curse.
Yeah, the Mike K curse. It's alive
curse
and well.
Curse spelled with a K.
Yeah. So, yeah, they have to find, like you said, Ngata showed some stuff against the Titans. I thought he played pretty well. Outside of that, I mean, he and Destiny Vallejo have combined for 7 tackles and a sack this season. That's just not going to cut it. Fletcher Cox is playing at an unreal level, but really, I mean, you're going to have to start using Mike Bennett and Brandon Graham more inside because you have no other choice. And also Chris Long and Derek Barnett are playing well, so that allows you to kind of do that.
I looked it up today. I think Fletcher Cox is playing 86% of the snaps.
Mm-hmm.
Jim Schwartz pointed out it is technically less total snaps, but that the percentage hasn't changed even as they've played more. And I think that would be his highest by almost 10%. He only played, I think, even if not less than 60, then around 60% of the snaps last year. That's a huge
he played
jump.
81 when they played in a 3-4, but those are different responsibilities.
Yeah.
It's a different.
That was his most productive year, sacks wise and stuff. Which maybe he might be part of this too. He wants to win Defensive Player of the Year. And the reality is, you have to play more snaps if you want to get those stats, especially at defensive tackle. But I just don't see that being a sustained, especially with how they clearly don't have the same depth they did last year. They don't have the next man up capability that they did last year. And defensive tackle is kind of flown under the radar, but I think that and safety are my 2 biggest concerns with this team right now, at least on the defense.
Now, we say that, right? but they are one of the best run-stopping teams in the league.
Yeah, they continue to be that, yeah.
So maybe it's that they value the run-stopping. They want to be the best at something as opposed to being middle of the run at pass rusher. I don't know. But they do need to figure out, because you can't just have Cox as your only pass rusher from the interior. He's going to, come playoff time, he'll be exhausted. But yeah, with that said, what's your next topic you got for us?
All right, next topic we got, this one was your idea, the tight ends and how they match up with the Vikings. They're going to play a pretty big role this week. Obviously, Zack, I wrote about it this week. Like, he's on pace. His pace is ridiculous right now. I think he's on pace for almost 200 targets, on pace for well over 100 catches, which would
make him 124.
Yeah, which would put him well ahead of the record in Eagles history, which is 90 by Brian Westbrook. It's kind of crazy to think they haven't had anyone more than 90, but I guess for a long time, just like the way they've run Andy Reid for the longest time, West Coast offense, you spread the ball. They didn't have great receivers. Tight ends were okay; they weren't amazing. Right. But he doesn't have any touchdowns. But the reality is that if they're scoring, it doesn't necessarily need to be him. Like Alshon Jeffrey can be a good. I don't think that's as big of an issue as you would think. But anyway, the point being, Zach Ertz is being targeted a lot. Dallas Goedert went back to kind of his workload that he had from previously against the Titans. Only played 20-something snaps, only targeted twice. I personally would like to see that go up. I just think he brings something to this offense that, especially when Jordan Matthews is already your clear-cut third receiver. All respect to him. He's been better than I expected, but there's a reason why he was a free agent, as we mentioned. Like, Dallas Goedert should be getting targeted more than Jordan Matthews, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you. And here's the thing. The Vikings have given up 17 plays of over 17 catches of over 20 yards and 5 catches of over 40 yards. Part of that is teams are finding ways to match up wide receivers and really athletic tight ends against Anthony Barr and Eric Kendricks, the linebackers. Now, Doug Peterson went out of his way to compliment both of them. To me, that's a tip that he's been paying attention to those linebackers. You can create a lot of mismatches against linebackers with the Eagles offense, even with the injuries. I think Nelson Aguilar, if you can get him on a linebacker. Sproles, if you can. But the ultimate mismatches are going to be Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz, because they're both basically big wide receivers. They can run. And so I think Goddard, this is a good game for Goddard. Like, this is a game where he can play a little bit like he did against the Colts. Kendricks is a really good linebacker. Anthony Barr's been disappointing this year, but they are giving up big plays. Harrison Smith has played well, but not as well as he typically does.
It's kind of weird that their they gave up 40 points to the Bills.
Yeah, and you also look at the corners. They have bigger corners. So Trey Waynes and Xavier Rhodes. Xavier Rhodes the better of the two. Peterson predicted that Rhodes would match up one-on-one with Jeffrey. I think that Nelson Aguilar could have a really big game against Trey Waynes. I also think this is an opportunity. I've said it every week, but Shelton Gibson, a deep threat. Have him go in there and run a 9 route.
I don't get it.
Okay, cool. Maybe he's not a great blocker. Maybe he doesn't run the greatest routes.
Give him
but he's fast.
Give him 5 plays a game.
You can run. Every wide receiver can run a 9 route. It doesn't or for those a go route, just run straight line down the field.
Who's their deep threat right now? They don't have one.
They don't.
They don't have a speedy speed burner guy. That's what Mike Wallace is supposed to be, and they didn't replace him.
If you look at the way Jordan Matthews just ran by that corner, that 56-yard touchdown, you'd think he'd be the speed guy.
That ain't happening again.
But they have big bodies that can go up against the bigger corners, the bigger safeties. I just think the Eagles can attack a lot downfield. I think they've been been a little vanilla, but I think right now is the time where you use Goddard, you use Sheldon Gibson, you use all your toys that you have in your toy chest.
Yeah, I guess this can tie into Alshon. We touched on him a bit already. We don't need to talk about him too much more. I think we've driven the point home how big of an impact he makes. Mm-hmm. Carson Wentz even talked about it today. He just has a factor. That touchdown, it was 3rd and goal, but they were 15 yards out. Mm-hmm. That's not an easy situation to be in, and he felt confident enough that he could throw it up to Alshon, who had 2 defenders basically on him, and he boxed them out like a basketball play. And that nobody else on this team, and there's a few guys in the league who are as good at boxing guys out in the red zone, and you're going to see that against the Vikings. They're going to target him quite a bit, I think.
And if you have all 22, or if you have Game Pass and you can watch all 22, watch the throw again. It looked great. Like, the placement looked great live. On film, I mean, like, it is literally a perfect throw.
Like the exact spot.
Yeah, the exact spot and the timing was perfect by Jeffrey with the catch. So they obviously still have chemistry despite not being able to work together a lot during the offseason. So I think that that's a positive sign.
All right, yeah, and let's stick with the offense for now. One of the bigger topics in terms of when we've spoken to the coaches this week has been kind of about the play calling and how kind of the balance of power and calling those plays is maybe we're not behind the scenes, we don't know, but it feels like it's a little bit different than last year when Frank Reich and John DeFilippo were working with Doug Peterson as opposed to Mike Rowe and Press Taylor. And the biggest thing that jumps to mind is towards the end of the first half against the Titans when they decided to run the ball on third down when they were in Titans territory, and so they had to call a timeout and kick a field goal as opposed to just going for the end zone, which is something they wouldn't have done last year. And just in my head, I was just thinking, like, does Frank Reich not let Doug Peterson do that? But he's like, does he tell Doug, like, hey, you don't do that? And Doug just trusted Frank Reich to the point where, like, I think he would listen to him if he did that. I don't know if Mike Rowe was in the coaching room last year, but I'm not sure what their relationship like is to this point. And Grove was pretty defensive when we were talking to him about it this week too. I mean, what's kind of your takeaway on that?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to jump.
It's hard to make assumptions.
Yeah, you don't want to jump to conclusions.
But there's something different.
I mean, I would say that Grove was pretty standoffish during that press conference, and not reading too much into that. But I think he knows that there's a lot of criticism for that play call. I think he knows that there's a lot of criticism for the red zone struggles. He's probably pretty frustrated.
Settling for field goals is not their forte.
Well, and they also got away from running outside zone too. There were a lot of things.
Didn't run the ball a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that you're not necessarily seeing from a Doug Peterson offense at its best. And so I think part of that is the switch between quarterbacks, because both guys don't do the same things. I think, there's a lot of personnel at stake. If this continues to happen, though, and we continue to see these hiccups and these, timid play calls, then you do have to wonder. Yeah. No, I think conservative means that you're doing it in a way where you're trying not to lose the game. I think timid is more of, hey, you don't trust a certain area of your team, and you're trying to counterbalance that with a play that won't hurt or help you.
Yeah. I mean, the reality is what it comes down to is Doug Peterson is making the calls. So if we're criticizing somebody for the play calling, it should be Doug Peterson.
Absolutely.
But I'm just wondering, like, how the dynamic has changed and how much influence Grow actually has on what they call.
I think it's a fair question.
Yeah, and all right,
unless you ask Mike Grow, because Mike Grow would just probably no answer you.
Another interesting topic, so I polled Eagles fans on Twitter this week. I asked them what their three biggest concerns were, and pretty unanimously, the top two were offensive line and secondary, and the third one, Jim Schwartz, got the most votes. And Jim Schwartz,
they have turned.
Yeah, I know, it's funny. Like a week ago, they would have hired him as head coach, but that kind of ties in this next one. I think we should talk about the secondary right now, especially safety. So they still only have three safeties, and just hearing they might have four now because it sounds like they consider. It sounds like they're going all in on him being the guy,
which makes sense to me.
Until Howie Roseman makes a trade, if he makes a trade. I mean, I get it. He has the talent. I think he'll eventually be good, but I'm not sure if he's ready to take on that role. And pretty clearly, Corey Graham has no business being a full-time starter. You watched more of the tape than I did since Sunday, but I've liked on Vontae Maddox his potential. He's a little small. I think he's going to be good. This will be good for him getting thrown into the fire, but he's going to go through his lumps. And as we saw, like Jalen Mills, the way they play at cornerback, they need that deep safety to be there to fix their mistakes. And I'm not sure if you want to trust a fourth-round rookie who's 5'9" and has never really played more than 20 snaps in a game when the Eagles need to win some games. I mean, it's not like they have a better option right now, and there's not great free agents, as we mentioned. So unless they trade for somebody, I don't know who would be available at this. They just have to go with what they have, of course. But I'm concerned quite a bit, actually.
It's funny. Avonte Maddox is kind of in the situation that Jordan Poyer was in when they drafted him during the
Former
chip.
seventh rounder, yeah.
Yeah, and then he went on to have a really great career in Cleveland and now in Buffalo. Maybe it's that they want by the bye week for Maddox to take over for Graham. Maybe that's the long-term projection. I mean, he is the fifth corner.
It's kind of what Jim Schwartz implied.
Right, he's the fifth corner already, and he only really can play nickel. I'm not putting him on the outside at all, just with his size. And you've got Rasul Douglas, who can play all three cornerback spots if they really need him to. So, yeah, I think you look at Maddox and you say to yourself, well, if he can carve out a role as that third safety and then eventually take over at free safety, you're in a really good spot. Also, consider this. They're going to have some cap issues next year. If he develops, maybe, you move on from Rodney McLeod and you do that thing. So maybe that's the thought process, too. I also think that this team values edge rushers over corners and safeties. So, with that said, the replacement issue might not be as big of a red flag or an alarm.
From their perspective.
From their perspective, and I'm doing flashing lights with my hands. I don't know why.
You guys can't see that?
Yeah, if you hear, hands opening and closing, that's what I'm doing. I don't think it's a terrible idea. I think it's a terrible idea if he falters this game, and so does Corey Graham, and you don't do anything. Because really right now, on a Wednesday, you're not going to trade for a safety and immediately put him out there.
Yeah.
And then you also have Thursday night football.
It's a short week.
Yeah, maybe.
So if they were going to get a guy, they would have had to have gotten him already.
Right, so maybe the thought process is we get through this
and then see where they're at.
Yeah, and then you get to week 7 with Carolina, and then, maybe you add a guy.
Yeah, because the trade deadline is week 8, right?
Yes, I believe so, and then they're heading to London.
And then bye week.
Right.
So, I mean, that would be a good stretch to teach a new guy the system or whatever,
correct.
Hypothetically.
So I think, you get those 3 weeks with him, whatever. And
then, just solve how he's playing?
Maybe. I mean, Earl Thomas certainly didn't. So with that said, though, I think the Eagles didn't make a bad decision. I know they're getting flack for putting a rookie out there who's never done it. Here's my beef. They keep saying that we don't like to move.
Where's the beef?
They keep saying we don't like to move guys mid-season. You are taking the least experienced guy you have in the secondary and moving him mid-season. So, to me, I'm very frustrated from a journalistic standpoint because I feel like I'm being told one thing and they're doing the other. But from a fan perspective, I can understand the frustration because everybody wants Jalen Mills at safety. People want Rasul Douglas at safety. People want Rasul Douglas starting a corner or Sidney Jones starting on the outside and Mills moved into nickel. But the Eagles keep saying we don't like to move guys midseason. We don't like to switch guys around. Well, I got to tell you something. Avonte Maddox, if he's playing that third safety role, Graham goes down or Graham's just unplayable, you only have one depth corner. And you can have 2 cornerback injuries in a game. There is a lot of moving parts. You keep saying you're going to cross-train these guys. That's terrific. Wonderful. Happy bar mitzvah. But you can't just say, hey, Rasul's important, but we're never going to play him, and he doesn't need to play safety, so there. And then you put Avonte Maddox out there. If you don't want to play Rasul Douglas, shop him. I mean, do so. What are you doing? If you don't think he can play corner consistently enough to get on the field or that he's better than Jalen Mills, look into what he can do at safety. Maybe move Malcolm Jenkins to free safety and have Rasul play strong safety if you don't think his coverage is that great. But every time that kid's on the field, he makes plays. He led the country. He was tied for the lead in interceptions as a senior at West Virginia. He comes into the game in week 1, produces an interception in 2 snaps. At some point, you have to just say, yeah, I know he's a risk maybe for deep balls, or maybe he's a risk for this. So is Jalen Mills. So what are you? I understand the respect level. Mills is a great tackler. Mills is tough. He's got a great attitude. He's able to move on from plays. But when you look at Rasul Douglas, he has way more upside and athleticism, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's been one of the most confounding non-decisions, I guess, them not
They don't
playing
seem
him.
to be. I wrote today. They don't seem like they're in a rush to play him at all, which makes no sense because he's a third-round pick.
Like what better way to develop a guy than to put him on the field when another guy's struggling?
You've got nothing to lose. You've got Corey Graham out there who has no upside, who's supposed to be out there to be a veteran presence and supposed to be able to know what he's doing out there, and the guy lines up. With all due respect to him, he was great after the game and took blame and answered every question. But he's lining up 10 yards deep when it's 4th and 15. What? Like, I'm just telling you, the mental errors couldn't get worse. The lack of upside couldn't get worse.
One thing I will say, a lot of people have been going after the defense for that loss, and the defense lost it for them in overtime and in parts of regulation, but I also think the offense settling for field goals, the way they ended at the first half, like they were in the position that they were on defense because of the way the offense struggled, and I feel like it's important to point that out. Like the play calling, it wasn't Doug Peterson's best performance, and they made a lot of mistakes on the offensive line. We haven't talked about that yet, have we? No. Let's talk about the offensive line now. I mean, that was supposed to be I think that was the position that was rated like there was one national site that said the best positions of any in the NFL, like of any position group in the NFL, was the Eagles' offensive line, I believe. It was either that or defensive line. But you could have made the case for either one. The point being they returned all 5 starters from arguably the most dominant offensive line in the NFL last year. And that included Jason Peters / Vaitai, who replaced Peters when he got injured. I mean, I don't know if I'm concerned to the point where like it's going to be a continuing issue, but this has been not looked great the last couple of weeks. I'm not sure Jason Peters at this stage of his career can play. Doug Peterson half admitted that today, actually, and that's a problem. You look at some of the plays, like he was getting manhandled on some of them. That's just not something that you could ever have said for Jason Peters over the last decade or plus. He's a Hall of Famer. Lane Johnson's getting beat by a rookie in Harold Landry, who's going to be a very good player, but he just beat him around the edge, which how many times could you even say that in the last couple of years? I mean, Jason Kelsey has still been pretty good, but I mean, he's made some mistakes himself. Brandon Brooks has been solid. I'm not sure Wisniewski might be the weak link of this group.
Sure.
Lane Johnson kind of implied maybe there would be some changes. I don't know if that was just Lane Johnson being Lane Johnson and saying something because it was whatever popped into his head, because that's what he's like. But Carson Wentz, I think he was been sacked 8 or 9 times in 2 weeks, and I think he's been hit like close to 20 times or something like that.
He was hit 11 times and had 4 sacks against the Titans.
That can't happen. Like that's not only is that a disappointment for this offensive line, that's worse. One of the worst units in the NFL level bad.
So I'll get into Doug Peterson talk, but it's accurate. It's not always all the offensive line.
It's not.
Quarterback hits.
But, I mean, they're a big part of that, obviously.
Yeah, I think Carson's held on to the ball a little bit longer than he should at times. I think Wendell Smallwood struggled a little bit, and so did Corey Clement, for that matter.
The fact that they need all the help they can get, because in part because the offensive line just might not be the same as it was last year.
I don't think Josh Perkins is that great of a blocker.
No.
I think
Zack if Goddard's your best tight end blocker as a rookie, it's not a great sign.
There's a lot of factors that guys aren't getting open.
Underrated guy they're missing is your boy Brent Selleck.
Yeah, he is my guy. He doesn't know it, but he is. That's a problem. I mean, like, that's what I've always been kind of preaching, is that, like, that offensive line's terrific, but
we're getting a presidential alert on our phones, which I'm sure everybody else got on their iPhones right now.
The first one, right?
The first one.
This is a test of the National Wireless Emergency Alert
Trump
System.
just interrupted our podcast.
I mean, is it an injury update on Darren Sproles? Look, there's a lot of factors that play into the hits. They need to stop. They need to work on blocking. Carson needs to be a little bit more situationally aware. And wide receivers need to get open. He's holding on to the ball because guys aren't open. The throw that I wanted to bring this up before we move on. There was a throw to Jordan Matthews that went like 20 feet in front of him that a lot of people brought up. They settled for a field goal. I watched that play I watched the coach's tape on that. There was absolutely no one open. Like, no one. And so Carson Carson had to throw, and that's happened several times. There's also been times where Carson's missed Zach Ertz or Dallas Goedert being wide open. He's missed Alshon Jeffrey he even missed Alshon Jeffrey at times in this Titans game. So I think overall, this Eagles team just needs to play better on offense.
All right, we've been accused of being too negative in the past. I don't think that's true, but let's switch gears a little bit. Let's each say a bright spot from these first 4 weeks / last week. Maybe something that hasn't been talked about as much. I'll go first. I think Michael Bennett has been somebody who, in the moment, he gets a lot of hype on Twitter, and then it kind of happens earlier in the game, and then as the game goes along, he's not quite as dominant. But he had a stretch against the Titans. We talked about this on our post-game pod, where I think he had like 3 or 4 pressures, including 1 sack over the course of 3 or 4 plays. Like he just clearly like still got it. And I every time I see him do something, I'm just like, man, they got him for a 5th-round pick. And Marcus Johnson, like he's just, they are better at defensive end this year, and that's kind of crazy considering how good they were last year at the position.
So I'll go to the other side of the defensive end group, and I'll say Chris Long. I think Chris Long looks better than he did last year. He's quick off the edge. He's constantly forcing pressure. He allows this team to move Mike Bennett inside or Brendan Graham. I think he's been a really strong bright spot. I would also include Jordan Hicks. Jordan Hicks has played very, very well coming off his injury. And I think he's a guy who's playing in a contract year, who's in a weird spot because he has so much injury history, and it hasn't affected his play. I think he's playing very, very well.
And just to throw one more into the mix, who weirdly isn't talked about probably as much as he should be, I would say, is Malcolm Jenkins.
Oh my gosh,
he has made some he has made some like errors in coverage and stuff like that, but like that's gonna happen. He just makes plays, man, especially when they need him. Like some of the tackles he was making late in that game, they were just. I feel like I'm about to sneeze and then it went away. But he continues to be amazing. He's like just clear. I feel like people just continue to underrate how important he is to this team.
He might be at worst the 4th best player on this team. I would
at worst, yeah.
At worst, I would go
Fletcher, Carson.
I would go Fletcher, Carson, Lane, and then him.
And based on performance this season, probably Malcolm ahead of Lane, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, you talked about it, but I gotta gush about this guy a little bit more. The plays that he was making linebacker plays at safety. He was making corner plays at safety. Like, this guy is one of the most versatile players in the league, and he's in his 10th season. Like, you shouldn't be able to do the things that he does in this defense. People talk a lot about Brian Dawkins, and he's probably the best modern-day player of his generation for the Eagles. But Malcolm Jenkins does a lot of the stuff that he does from a leadership and an on-field perspective, and I think he was a guy that a lot of people didn't want when they signed him. They wanted Jarius Byrd.
The Saints were trying to. Did they release him or did they just?
No, he was a free agent.
Well, but at that point, people were pretty down on him at that point. Though.
Right, they signed Jarius Byrd instead of him, and he came here.
There was some criticism for even like signing him because he was he was on a downswing.
And he's had one of the best 5 season stretches of any Eagles defensive player I can remember.
The funny thing is, he probably will never get the credit he deserves for it because he doesn't put up the numbers. Like he puts up solid tackle numbers, okay interception numbers. He doesn't really like get those numbers that you normally would, but he creates those opportunities for everybody else.
I think he's a guy that we talked about Avonte Maddox, we talked about Jalen Mills, he's a guy that you can put out there and trust lesser talent around him because he does so many good things and plays so well.
Of their 2 safeties, if they had lost him, they'd be in a lot more trouble than
McLeod,
yeah,
we're hearing all these sob stories about Rodney McLeod. Malcolm Jenkins makes this entire defense work. So, there's that.
Yeah. All right. That we'll end on that note. We did our Eagle 8. We're going to get that going every week now. Our next pod will be our preview pod and then our post-game pod, which everybody seems to love those ones. Either love to hate or hate to love. I don't know.
Hey, that's my brand.
All right. As always, make sure you subscribe. We're on all the apps, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Spreaker, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, SoundCloud. Write us a review, ask a question. We'll answer it. Follow us on Twitter, tweet at us. Thanks for listening, everybody.